Fight! Anytime a new console is released, there are many developers that look back into their franchises to see which ones are worthy enough of getting remakes or entirely new games for the new era. Many times this works perfectly. Games such as Mario 64 retained the same essence of the series whilst offering new and fresh ways to play the game, taking advantage of the new and more powerful system. Other studios bring back classics such as Duke Nukem to mixed success, aimed to those who have never played other versions of the game who may now want to play games which they've heard so much about, but have not previously had the machine to play it on. Then there are the more unusual cases. Gex was a headline game for the Panasonic 3DO. Whilst the console was ill-fated, Gex was actually the console's best-selling game. When you consider it was up against games such as Star Wars Rebel Assault, you realise it had punched well above its weight and had taken on huge franchises and won. After the demise of the 3DO, Gex was ported onto other systems such as the Sega Saturn and Sony's PlayStation, but the time came for the dreaded sequel to be made. Gamers at the time had been wowed by the huge 3D worlds which consoles now had no problem creating, and so Crystal Dynamics took Gex from 2 dimensions into the third. I actually had a 3DO on launch day as a kid. My dad always loved the technology of the time, and so the 3DO was impressive on paper and hailed as the future of gaming. Playing Gex on the 3DO was like playing the future. The graphics were superb, the sound was immersive, and the gameplay was a 2D powerhouse in excellent level design and animation. The problem was that Gex as a character was really created at a very specific time. The early to mid 90s were all about chewed, and Gex's wacky humour and constant one-liners were hilarious for the time. So like many gamers, I was expecting the character to get rebooted heading into the next generation of gaming where the market had changed so significantly. Perhaps worried that without the one-liners, Gex would have nothing to set itself apart from the other animal-based platformers of the time, the decision was made to do very little to alter the character. When Gex 64 landed in 1998, it was like playing a parody of platformers from the early 90s, and sadly that was something which allowed reviewers of the time to really take issue with. The game and story of Gex 64 Enter The Gecko is exactly that of the PlayStation 1 version, which was released about a year before this. After Gex defeated Rez in the first game, he turned into a recluse, and he spent years watching episodes of Kung Fu Theatre and pretty much wasting his life away. One day, while binge watching TV, the screen goes blank and the face of Rez shows up repeatedly. 2 government agents show up, ask for Gex's help, he declines, and then they just kidnap him and basically force him to battle Rez once again. Actually, well, they don't really force him, they give him a suitcase full of cash, a secret agent suit, and a woman to wish him luck. And that was pretty much all it took to get Gex to head back into the media dimension. When in the media dimension, you must enter the different theme worlds and accomplish certain tasks to unlock remotes. The more remotes that you collect, the more levels and worlds open up and you make your way to the final showdown. It sounds formulaic on paper, but the media dimension is one of the game's strongest points. Many times in platform games you get the standard fire, earth, water worlds and so on, but in Gex you get the toon world, horror world, sci-fi world, prehistoric land and so on. This really allowed the developers the ability to create something that's visually unique and very refreshing to play for those who'd become tired of the platform genre tropes, almost found in every other game at this time. Saying that though, Gex 64 did have some cutbacks from the PlayStation release, partly due to the limited storage capacity and partly no doubt to avoid Nintendo censorship. Secret levels such as the Texas Chainsaw Manicure and Trouble in Uranus were pulled, along with over 500 one-liners were shed. Many of the sound effects also felt the same cutbacks. Dana Gould of The Simpsons fame helped to write the game's story and act in an advisory role for the different scenarios in the game, and also voice the character for the American market. The game's engine is the exact same one used for the first Tomb Raider game, but with modifications to take into account Gex's trademark ability to stick to walls and pretty much go anywhere. Sadly, in Gex 64 Enter The Gecko, this has been restricted to certain surfaces which are used to move the levels along, rather than giving you the sense of free exploration which many had been expecting. The levels themselves do feel run-of-the-mill when playing though. They often feel like point-to-point challenges, and although Gex has an interesting moveset, it pales in comparison to those found in Banjo-Kazooie. The exploration element in the game also feels like a missed opportunity, and those who do explore are generally rewarded with extra tokens or lives instead of secrets to warrant such fates. The biggest problem with Gex 64 though is the game's awful camera system. Like many early 3D platform games, it never really seems to position itself in a comfortable location. Often it will swing around wildly, which when combined with the game's frequent pinpoint jumps, it turns each mission into a frustrating blend of trial and error. With the C buttons you can move the camera, but it moves so slowly that by the time you get it into a position you're comfortable with, then it will begin moving again, which often makes positioning it in the first place completely pointless. This too makes obvious by the game's awkward controls. Gex animates poorly and each movement feels stiff and jarred. Nintendo showed the world how to do free-flowing 3D platforming on the console's very first release, and so it's difficult to see how other studios found so much trouble in this basic requirement of games. Another missed opportunity are the costumes. When at various points in the game, Gex will change his attire to tie in with the area that you're entering. For example, in the Tomb World, you change into a bunny suit, and at another time you switch into a Swiss James Bond white suit. Rather than giving you huge changes in abilities and gameplay, these suits often serve you slight upgrades or a single additional move which is required to solve a puzzle in the game. I'd have personally liked to have been more expanded with this, and when it's billed as one of the game's main selling points, it really was disappointing that more wasn't done with this. Another area of concern are the graphics. The PlayStation 1 version had no fogging and much sharper textures, and so it came as a surprise to many to see that the N64 version had an absolutely absurd amount of fogging. This works well in the prehistoric world as it adds a sense of mystery and realism to it, but in the technology-themed future world it looks awful and completely out of place. Each time I look at the game, all I can think about is just how much of a rush port this must have been. The final nail in the coffin in this version of the game is its sound. With so much audio cut, you are left with the same one-liners being repeated over and over again, sometimes multiple times in the same short level. Sure, some are funny the first few times you hear it, but after the 6th or 7th time in half an hour, it quickly wears thin, and Gex's charm soon turns into irritation. The music too is a mess. Sure, some of the world themes are catchy, but again, due to the limitations of the cart format, I was surprised to hear that instead of redoing the music, they just shortened the pieces that they already had. This means that in some levels the music will just stop short out of nowhere mid-note, and then restart after a short pause. This is further evidence that little care was given in porting the game over. Don't believe me? Well then look at the aggregate scores for different versions of the game on sites such as GameRankings. The PlayStation version of the game received positive reviews and an average score of 80%. The N64 version on the other hand just about musters an average of above over 60%. For those who are still interested in playing the game, I'd suggest the PC version, but for those wanting a console port, then the game is available on the PlayStation Network, which is the superior version to own if you don't have or can't find a PS1 disc at a good price. For everyone else then I suggest sticking away from the N64 game. Sure, like every game there will be those that have fond memories of playing it, but if you revisit the game now you'll quickly realise that nostalgia is a beautiful and sometimes terrible thing. So for today's topic of conversation, I'd love to know why you think Gex hasn't been seen in years. With other classic characters such as Duke Nukem being slated in their rebooted games, could you ever see the slippery gecko making a comeback, or do you feel the series is about a stone colder Steve Austin? Let me know your thoughts and memories of the game in the comments section down below, and until next time.